Welcome to the Ripened Heart podcast, where we explore the depths of the human psyche through the lens of homeopathy, human design, and astrology for soul-deep healing. Each episode will feature vulnerable and thought-provoking conversations highlighting healing modalities that help us shift our perspective on what it means to be a healthy and fulfilled human being in today's world. I'm your host, Kaylee Anello. Let's dive into the podcast. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ripened Heart podcast. Today, I am joined by Roland Guenther. He is a German medical doctor and homeopath who is in Vancouver, British Columbia. He's at Vancouver Island Homeopathy.com. That's where you can get all of his amazing articles and videos and see his services. I highly recommend checking them out. You update your blog pretty regularly, Roland, and I'm always taking a peek to see what we've got going on over there. It's always wonderful. And I was just really inspired to have Roland on today because I have taken several of his webinars with his colleague Sunil, and they're just always amazing and incredible. And the connection to nature that Roland has is just something that I haven't encountered a lot in my life. And I think whether or not, you're a homeopath or you're interested in natural health or spirituality, I think that you'll really get a lot from today's episode. We're going to go into his journey about how he became a medical doctor and came to incorporate homeopathy later in his practice, his time with Native American medicine people, and the process of Shemia, which we'll go into later in the episode, where you really connect to the consciousness of the things that we use as remedies in homeopathy, whether that be a metal or an animal or a plant or other substances too. And so I'm really excited to dive in today with Roland. And I wanted to just start us off with the quote that is on his website, which I think is just so beautiful and really encompasses why I got into homeopathy as well. It's a quote by R.M. Rilke, and it says, "How life comes to be, how it moves in the smallest creature, how it branches out and expands, how it blooms, bears fruit. To learn all this, this is what drives me." And that's really the beautiful mystery behind homeopathic medicine, is that all of these substances, whether or not we need them as remedies, they have something to teach us, and they have medicine for us, whether that be a lesson or a curative property. And so I just think that's so beautiful. So without further ado, hi, Roland. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Hello, Kaylee. Thank you so much for inviting me and for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, me too. Me too. And so why don't we just get right into it today? I am really, really curious. What inspired you to go into medicine in the first place? I know you were in the more conventional route at first. So what drew you to that?
To medicine in general?
Yeah.
Well, that's a difficult question for me because I don't know 100%. But I think I grew up in post-war Germany, and my youth, my childhood was overshadowed from the war and from the Nazi times, Holocaust, and all of that. And my parents were marked and traumatized by what had happened. And so the atmosphere in post-war Germany was marked through a zombie-like numbness towards the past that was just overwhelming, and a ant-like busyness about building up, and just making again, building up something again. And I think my interest in healing comes from that, just from the certain lack of presence, emotional presence, and openness to talk about certain things. That I experienced the heaviness of the just the energies, yeah, of
Mm-hmm.
denial, or I should not say denial. Partially it's denial, but it's simply overwhelm. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like when you would have walked through post-war Germany after the war. It's I once read a piece written by a Jewish lady who visited Germany after the war, and it just could not understand how people are so numb that they don't talk about what happened. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but when you look at it through homeopathic eyes, the whole country was in an opium state. Yeah,
Oh,
just
I was wondering.
highly traumatized, highly um, and everybody was just happy not to feel,
Yeah.
which means not being present. Yeah. So, and that's of course was for me probably the start where I found um, help, support, community was a lot in nature,
Mm-hmm.
and that probably also made me go to medicine and to healing. I
Yeah.
wanted to contribute something. And that also was probably the desire to get out of this numbness, yeah, of this shut down state.
So for people who are unfamiliar with homeopathic states, it's kind of, the lens that we look at it as homeopaths is, what's the pattern that people are experiencing at the mental level, at the physical level. So can you describe a little bit what the opium state looks like for people unfamiliar?
Well, when you see opium as a drug, yeah,
Hmm.
and it's a painkiller.
Hmm.
So the main thing, it's a painkiller. Yeah. Opium as a plant is so connected with human suffering through thousands of years. We used opium when we were in overwhelming pain. Yeah. And we also, as a drug, it's been used simply to avoid the harshness of life and things that are too painful. So, and what we call in homeopathy an opium state would be somebody that's heavily traumatized from something, from an absolute overwhelming trauma. I have see that in people like after severe accidents, after massive, yeah, I had um, a soldier jumping with a parachute and the parachute didn't open, stuff like that, and he survived, but he was absolutely traumatized, polytraumatized, and on all levels, on massive on the physical, but also on other levels. And when things get too bad, we have certain trauma responses. And one of the main trauma responses, we can shut down feelings when they are overwhelming. That means when we shut down feelings, there's a certain area in our inner landscape that is like not alive anymore. We're shut down, it's numb. That means, but also to that degree, we cannot really be present with our present where we are, because part of our presence is overshadowed by a past that was overwhelming and we could not deal with. So when we experience things like that, like also in a client, this is what we call an opium state. Yeah, this mechanically um, doing your stuff like soldiers took. Also, I know it from a friend of mine who is a Vietnam veteran. They took opium sometimes before battles. Yeah, and that means I don't want to feel. I want to be numb, dot pain, and I don't want to feel fear or anything. I just want to do. Yeah, this is an opium state. When this continues, when people are born into a collective opium state, for example, in a war, after a war, then it becomes a pattern in life that we can hardly escape. And this is when we as homeopaths would use not opium as a substance, but the opium as an energetic impulse. The wisdom of this plant that helps us to shut down as an energetic impulse, it does the opposite. It helps us to open up and deal with things again.
Wow, that's beautiful. It's beautifully said. And it just shows the polarity that's so present with some of these substances that get a bad rap, like opium or other drugs that we use in homeopathy, like you said, is purely informational, energetic impulses. I love how you put it like that, where it will do the opposite of, what it does in its crude form when you ingest it. And I think that's
Right. Yeah.
so beautiful. And so I'm curious then, so you were a surgeon when you were in conventional medicine more so. And so how did you find homeopathy from there?
Well, after I finished the university studying, I thought, I start with surgery because that's practical stuff that I won't forget in my life, and you need it a little bit, yeah, and then I move on. Well, I loved it, and I got stuck there for 5 years, and then I got out and went into general medicine, and for about 25 years I was a general practitioner, family doc, and I loved it very much. A few years in the military also as a medical doctor, and the time when I switched from conventional medicine to homeopathy was in the beginning of my family practice. I had got to know homeopathy in my late teens. I was working during summer as a bird warden in a bird sanctuary in Germany, and my boss in the environmental organization I did that for was friends with a medical doctor who practiced also homeopathy, and I was very touched by this woman, getting to know her, and it was so unconventional, so different way of looking at the world. And besides that, in my teens, I practiced a lot of yoga. And not just the asanas and physical stuff, but I read whatever I could from these East Indian masters. And then I learned about homeopathy, then I realized, if something of what I learned from these East Indian masters is true, then this is how healing has to work. And so it was in the back of my mind since my late teens. During medical school, I could really not, it was so contradicting. Partially, I really had to focus and put it on the back burner. And during my time in surgery, I brought it more forth because, well, surgeons are not so invested into, they want to see that it works, yeah. And when in the hospital, people have abscesses and this or that, and you give certain homeopathic remedy, it simply works better, yeah. So that was easy to combine. And then when I started family practice, then it was clear, yes, I can treat something with Western medicine and go against it. But actually, deep down, I know that this is not healing, this is fighting it. And healing means saying yes to a part of life, integrating it. And when we integrate it, we can transcend it and move on. And this is exactly what homeopathy does. And I have to tell you, yeah, I think it was still 3 years after I had started homeopathy in practicing mainly homeopathy in my practice. I still want it every time it really works. Yeah, but you get used to it as a homeopath that it works, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's quite amazing when we come from a Western worldview and then go into homeopathy to see, well, that's a totally different principle, but it sure works.
Yeah, I can agree with you there because I've been personally experimenting with homeopathy for close to 8 or 9 years now.
Yeah.
I started using it because I had my chiropractor actually back in Chicago introduced me to it. And so I kind of got the homeopathy books myself and tried to self-prescribe and definitely took way too many doses, definitely made a lot of mistakes. And that kind of through my mistakes is how I saw how powerful it was, though. Because when you prove the substance, when you take too much of it and you end up producing that picture for a little bit, you're like, wow, that is Ignatia, that is pulsatilla, that is whatever the remedy is. And it was remarkable. So I kind of learned about it through that way. And then now in my mentorship with Doug Brown, who we've had on the podcast a couple of episodes back, I've been shadowing with him for over 2 years now, and I'm still amazed every time. It never ceases to, just light up my entire day when you see a patient come back and they look different. Not only do they feel better, but you can feel energetically they're a different person than when they first came into the office, and that still amazes me. It's fascinating.
It is amazing. It is.
Yeah.
I can totally. Well, you have a wonderful mentor in Doug. Yeah, that's so beautiful. And yeah, when we look at this homeopathic principles, we give something that would be we give something as energy that in its raw form would be able to create a problem, and as energy it can help cure it. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yes, it's like the other day it was my wife, she burned herself. She got some hot stuff over her hand, and then, well, she's also a medical doctor, and so she went to put something cold on it, and I didn't say anything, but of course she knew I would put it to the heat again. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I get burned, I go towards the flame slowly and carefully. Then it burns like hell, and I go away, yeah, and the pain calms down. And when the pain comes again, then I bring it again to the flame, close. And so healing has something to do with making peace with the origin, and it's
Absolutely.
about integrating something. It's about saying yes to something. In a way, it's so crazy. We come with something, what we want to get rid of, yeah, and the path is the opposite. The path is saying yes, integrating it, and move on. As long as we say no and we fight something, we're tied to it, and it can not move well. It moves with a lot of resistance, with a lot of friction, if at all. And in the moment we can totally accept something, we can have peace, and with peace comes relaxation, and space opens up, and then we have choice to move on in our life. But not because we fought it and killed it, yeah, but because we made peace with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is so right now, where we have in the background Afghanistan. Yeah, it's such an enormous. I'm really touched from what's happening in Afghanistan. Yeah, like the other day I just cried about it, and but to see when we fight something, it's not going to create healing. It's not going to create peace. Yeah. So it's about, can we integrate something? Can we communicate? And that's a homeopathic process. Yeah. to help us to integrate something. And that's why we then have the freedom to move on.
Yeah, and that's something that I've thought about a lot when observing patients is I notice there's such a range of experiences that people have with remedies. Some people will come in with pathology, doesn't matter if it's, a small pain or headache or something more serious. Some just have rapid recovery, and it seems like it just kind of happens in a really miraculous way. And then other people, they have a lot of layers. They have a deep process that they have to go to. And it's kind of like, I like to call it like the Pandora's box phenomenon, where everything that was under the surface starts to come out, whether it be in their dream life, whether it be in different pains in the body, and those levels have to be worked through. And I just find that so interesting how the healing process can occur in such a different way for different people. And the making of peace is a different process for different people. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts
Yes.
about that from what you've seen in your practice.
Well, I just can say you observed that very beautifully. Like, when we give, for example, a remedy like natrum muriaticum, salt. And what's the essence of salt? The essence of the remedy could best be described in this story we have in the Old Testament, in the Bible, where, what was this? Lot was told from the Lord, you better leave because I want to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah or something like that. Yeah, You can take with you whatever you want, just don't turn back. Well, his wife turned back and he turned into a pillar of salt. This is what happens to us often when we're traumatized. Yeah, something terrible happens, a deep loss, a deep grief, and emotionally we keep turned back because it was too much to digest. That means we're tied to it. But that is a part of us that then is not in flow and in the movement of our life. That's a part of us that still is looking backwards to what happened there and to whatever we lost, or the person we lost, or the grief we experienced, and tied to that and get stuck there. So in that sense, the salt is solidified, petrified tears that don't flow anymore.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And when in an old grief story, that of course that creates then after years, sooner or later it will create physical problems, because everything that happens on the energetic levels, if it's a constant and not moving, it will be represented in the physical. It affects our physical body. And when somebody like that comes, then we give a remedy made out of simple salt, something people eat every day. Yeah. But here we have the pure energy of the salt. Yeah. So it doesn't matter a few grains of salt if you eat it or not. That's not healing. But the pure energy, highly diluted and at the same time highly energized, that is what changes, what can make petrified tears flow again. And then and very often people cry for a few days and then they are through, and they are more present and can look more into the future, because the burden of the past is could be turned into movement. And some people, now grief can be something we remember. But when it's been very early in life, it can be something that we don't remember. Or maybe there's also not in our lifetime, maybe the grief started in my mom's life, yeah, and I was born into this grief energy and picked it up and carried it with me, and I never heard the story. But it doesn't matter for us. We don't deal with the story, we deal with the leftovers of that energy. And so when we give as homeopath the the remedy. For some people, the memory opens up and, oh, I remember that. And for a few days, they go through this grief again, but that they can move through with the help of this remedy so that it comes into a flow. And for some people, it's just like something that had locked them in is falling away, and it's just like a burden that you carried, all of a sudden it's not there anymore, like you say, like from magic. But it's not necessarily that a memory must come up. For some people it does, and for others it does not. And that makes total sense, because the memory is the story, and the story is the past in a way. Yes, it's an unfinished business, and that's why we carry it in our presence and make it even our future when we keep carrying it. But it's the story, and the past is past. What's left over, what sits in the nervous system of our body, is the energy, how it felt. And when it's like in trauma treatment, yeah, yes, we got to touch the old story, not because the story could be, we don't change the past in a way, but to come up with a feeling, with the energetics that are connected with that story, with what could not be dealt with, then to deal with it and to go through it with the help of somebody else. Very often we need relationship. We get wounded in relationship, and we heal in relationship, and when we do that in relationship, we can move through.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of like the analogy that you used with your wife when she got the burn, and the principle of like cures like. You need that similar stimulus, whether it's the heat of the flame or the grief, to match that, to show your inner landscape, your consciousness, a match of what's been crystallized. And so it can recognize that and, decrystallize, move it, get it to flow. So it's not this stuckness in the nervous system. And then finally it can move through, and you're, like you said, you're not carrying that. And that's so often, what happens when patients come in is they come in for a headache, they come in for this physical ailment, and they start to see for themselves too, through unraveling their story, oh my gosh, like all of these things are connected, and there's a reason that my body's expressing these physical symptoms, and it's not random and it's not all just genetics, and there's so much more to the story. And I remember you talking about this in one of the webinars that I took. I'm not remembering which one, but you were saying that a lot of the part of the reason that we crystallize some of those emotions when we go through trauma in childhood is because there isn't that other person there to see us and to hold space for us in that pain. Because we're a child, we can't articulate it. It just comes out through maybe acting out or through screaming and crying. And our parents, they don't know how to manage that or how to help us through that. And so it just becomes kind of trapped in the body through that way. And then through having that other person witness that pain and help us to move through that pain, whether it's a homeopath or a trauma-informed therapist or whatever modality people are resonating with for themselves, that's part of why it's so healing, is because finally somebody is creating that space for you that feels safe and that feels, they're not going to judge you for it. You can move through it finally.
Right. That is exactly, especially what happens early in childhood. As children, we're not yet able to regulate our emotional experiences ourselves and to digest them ourselves. We are really rely that we can co-regulate with somebody that sees us, yeah, or that feels with us. Like when a child comes to mom and says, or to dad, I'm scared, yeah. And then mom and dad say, oh, I can feel you're scared. Come, let me hold you. And then we look at the problem together. Yeah. So in that moment, there is there's an attunement of mom and dad and the child, and the fear of the child gets digested in this safety of that relationship, can co-regulate, and then it becomes an experience where the child grows actually from. Next time it already can deal better with whatever the situation was. Yeah. And when we're alone as children, then we cannot co-regulate. And then these overwhelming situations cannot be digested. And they have then to get locked up somewhere. And that's and that is what, in the end, that's what trauma is. Yeah. Being alone with something that's overwhelming. And that can be very different for different people. Yeah. But it's not, trauma is not just what happened. Trauma is mainly what's left in my body from the experience. Yeah, does it have, is there something left, or could it be digested when it happened, or close to when it happened? And yes, like I said before, we get wounded in relationship, we get hurt in relationship, and we need relationship to heal.
I think that's such an important distinction because I come from a psychology background originally, and there's a lot more awareness around trauma now, and specifically childhood trauma and inner child work and all of this, where there can be sometimes a misunderstanding where people get afraid of trauma because they think that because something bad happens to them, that means it's going to get stored automatically and then they'll get sick from it or something like that. There becomes a kind of a fear of life's challenges that I've seen that can comes up through just a misunderstanding of why certain events are traumatizing while others can be moved through, like you said, with another person through connection and through really digesting that energy in an appropriate way. And then, but then on the other side, like you were saying with events in Afghanistan, or you coming from the war in Germany, some of those are true traumas that, will take more to work through, obviously, because it's just at that point of overwhelm has been way, way overshot. It's just so overwhelming that you go into that state collectively. So I think that's an interesting distinction to make.
Yeah, I like it that you say trauma creates fear of trauma and then we avoid it. However, we have to see on the other side, trauma is also the way we grow.
Mm-hmm.
This trauma, or the challenges, the way we grow. A child, if it never experiences fear, yeah, it doesn't learn how to deal with it and to integrate it. Oh gosh, we're human. That's why we get scared. Yeah. And so it's not something that needs to be avoided. Yeah. It needs, a child might get scared and it needs us to go through it, to digest it, but we should not avoid it, because then we almost prevent a growth process, an evolution of the child. Yeah. So, and when we look at the whole human history, is the history of trauma, and every trauma, when it's being dealt with, now also in, I don't know, you know probably better from psychology, but we speak about the post-traumatic growth. Yeah, something that years ago you did not hear anything about, but now we're talking about it. Yeah, so it's in the trauma treatment world. Yeah, it's very clear when we go through a challenge, when we manage to go through, there's a benefit. There's a benefit in having gone through something, and it's so clear. For we have the same thing also in diseases. Yeah, like I'm a medical doctor, and from my background and in years in medical school, I don't think I heard one single word about the benefit and the growth after a disease. I only heard whatever can go wrong when somebody is sick, whatever. And in the end, we don't trust life anymore. We don't trust our body. Our body is just a sleeping problem to a bomb waiting to explode somewhere. Something goes wrong. But all these healing mechanisms that we have, how much we can trust that, yeah? And all these ancestors that went through problems, went through diseases, and today it's our normal self-healing mechanisms. Yeah, they are built on problems, or they went through problems and challenges and made them. So that is something, that is the way we grow. Yeah, and when it's not about preventing that, it's about how can we prepare for that and how can we support each other in going through that. This is for me the real question. Yeah, it's not, we're not going to avoid evolution. We're not going to avoid challenges. We're going to get challenged from life. Yeah, life's going to throw things at us that hurt, and pain is just a part of life. Yeah, and loss is part of life, because life is transient. Yeah, it's temporary. So there's things that go away, but on the flip side is there's things that come, and there's growth, and there's experiences of expansion in that when we grow through. And through every challenge that we learn to integrate and to digest, we grow. Our world expands. Yeah.
Yeah, and that just reminds me of something I've been hearing and thinking about recently too, is that when people are on a healing journey, if they experience any symptom, they see it as they've done something wrong. That they're not doing something perfectly enough, or that that they become afraid of meeting that pain again, and they take it as kind of like they're doing something wrong or their body is wrong. And that they're only healed when they're in this perfect state of equilibrium all the time, whether that be physically or emotionally or in life. And it's just never going to be the case, because like you said, it's like when if you sit 24 hours a day, all of your muscles become weak because they're not being used. You need to put force on the muscles, you need to exercise, you need to move, you need to put a certain amount of stress on the body for it to remain strong and healthy. And it's the same thing if we're never met with a cold or a headache or something that deeply saddens us, or something, it's just not human. It's not what a human is.
Yeah. I worked a lot in environmental things, and when I was young, for a while, we realized how important ants are for the health of the forest. So we protected all the anthills, because we saw, oh God, when the ants are sleeping in winter, then the wild boars come and dig them up and eat them, and the woodpeckers come and eat them. So we have to protect them. We protected them. And the ones that were unprotected were more healthy and more vital.
Wow.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not about pampering ourselves. Yeah. It's not about pampering our kids. Please don't. Yeah. It's about allowing life to meet us. Yeah. And say, okay, here I am. I'm available. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's there's a certain amount of openness, even energetically, that comes when you fearlessly or even fearfully meet life, but you do it. You go out there and you don't try to put yourself in a bubble or a cocoon, or it's the same way, we're experiencing that collectively we're learning that about immunity. When you sanitize everything and you shield yourself from the outside world, it can cause immune system problems because your immune system isn't being challenged it's not remembering all the adaptations that have occurred, like you were saying, ancestrally, so that we can, fend for ourselves from all these bacteria and fungi and viruses and just everything that we're constantly surrounded by.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Yeah, so I find that as a very, very important point, that it's not about avoiding problems. It's really about welcoming life and saying yes to life, even though we know life brings problems.
Yeah.
Yeah. And encouraging each other, and not even running away from our own fear, but say, yes, I'm scared because I'm human. Yeah. And that's okay. I can be scared and still say yes to life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so there's, as long as I can talk also about my fears and can be with it, it's not overwhelming. In the moment I have to pack it away, yeah, and have to run away from it, that's when it gets power over me, and then it limits my life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it just reminds me of how, when we're prescribing remedies, one of the big things that we look at is what are the person's phobias, because they're characteristic to a
Yeah.
specific remedy state. And it's interesting how sometimes, because I'm newer to homeopathy, sometimes I can't always relate the remedy to that phobia. Like, why would, this remedy state have a fear of snakes when, it seems kind of unrelated, or heights, or something like that. And I just think it's interesting how there is a reason, from a homeopathic perspective, I guess, that we are prone to certain fears or phobias more than others, and how the energy of the remedy can help us, like you said, make peace and to integrate that fear. And I've even noticed, like, kind of going into what Shamiya is a little bit, it's a good segue, because when you're proving a remedy, at least what I've found through self-experimentation, I've never participated in a Shamiya ceremony, but it can bring to you almost to your life that which you fear.
Absolutely.
And I find that so fascinating. So maybe we can go into Shamiya a little bit about how you got interested in doing these Shamiya ceremonies, what you think the value is in them, and just take us through that a little bit.
Yeah, maybe let me first say something about what is it. And
Yes.
I would,
Yes.
when I came to Canada 15 years ago and thought, one thing I want to really start doing here is triturations. Old homeopaths told me, after they watched me for a while, they said, Roland, what you do is great, but it's a word nobody knows what it is. Even
Yeah.
homeopaths don't know what it is, and it sounds terrible. Find a different word for it. I said, well, in Germany we have we have a word, Verreibung. It sounds much nicer than trituration. Yeah, trituration is just a Latin word, triturare, and it's a word from the old pharmaceutical world. Yeah, and it means grinding down to a fine powder. Yeah, but it's an ancient, archaic process. Yeah, healers ground herbs down for thousands of years. Yeah. And so each one of us remembers it almost because it sits in our body as experience. So many ancestors have done this. Our moms grind down some powder or some herb for spice or for healing or for tea or whatever. Yeah, but it's something everybody did. Yeah. So, but what is it? It's part of the homeopathic, of the preparation of a homeopathic remedy. When we do it from scratch, like by hand, not just buy it from the pharmacy somewhere and out of the shelf and think that's it, yeah, but we go to nature, take a little bit of a leaf of this plant, put it in a mortar, add milk, sugar, and then start grinding it down with a pestle, and that's then triturating it. And to do that in a very specific way, the way Hahnemann, the founder of homeopathy, described it in his book Organon, Then it's about you grind it 6 minutes, then you scrape the bowl clean, the mortar clean, and you grind another 6 minutes. Then you add 2 grams milk sugar more, and so on and so on. Yeah, and then this is a very structured process of how to do it. That's a homeopathic trituration. And then it was in the 90s, early 90s, there was a man, Witold Erler, in Germany, and he was a biologist actually, and in his studying biology at the university, and then it is this holidays when there was no lectures at the university, and then he earned some money, and he did that in working in a pharmacy. And one day the pharmacist told him, okay, there's a homeopathic remedy that's not available, but I need it. So this is the way you do it. Go in the basement, take this herb, grind it down in this way. So Witold was sitting there in the basement, grinding this herb down, and experienced a herb that he knew from his botanical studies. And all of a sudden he could experience this herb's energy. And he was totally excited. He said, wow, here I learned so much more than I ever learned in biology about this herb. I can experience it. I can experience what it does to me in my body. I can experience how it affects my emotions. Yeah, I can understand a little bit of it. Yeah, he was so excited. Then he asked homeopaths, "Do you know that process? Do you know what you have?" Nobody knew, because all homeopaths just bought it from the pharmacy. Yeah, and the people that knew, like when I was a young homeopath and learned about triturations, I was given a little bit something and a mortar and pestle, and we did that for 5 minutes, and then we were told, okay, that's how it works, and it's for hours. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, but the magic that when you do it, and when you allow it, and when you, especially, and even when you have the intention that to allow that remedy to touch you, then the remedy takes you by the hand and guides you on a journey that is just amazing, because it's not something you could make up. Yeah, and it's like when you put a little bit of a plant or mineral or animal or whatever it is, yeah, into that mortar, there's an energy that condensed in the physical. Like we talked before about the salt, yeah, there's an energy in that salt. When we set it free, yeah, all of a sudden it flows, and it flows in our system. When we prepare a remedy like that, and I love to do it in groups, yeah, because the group experience even intensifies it, and the remedy can resonate with every person in that group a little bit different, and then we can put our experience together like in a mosaic and see a bigger picture arise. And then we, in grinding down, we set free the energy that was condensed in the physical. That creates a vibrational field in the room. And because we are sitting in that vibrational space, every cell of our body starts resonating with it. And then we saw after hundreds of these triturations, well, when you're in the first hour, usually we are pretty close still to the physicality of the remedy of what we put in our mortar, and it's more that our body resonates. Second hour, it's after we dilute it and put fresh milk sugar, so it's different. We reach a different level of energetic level, and we react mainly with our emotions. Never only, but mainly. Third hour, we get so far we went through physical problems, emotional problems, yeah, more or less uncomfortable, and without understanding much. And the third hour, when we reach a mental level, is where we can look back and say, oh, I understand what it's basically what it's about. Yeah, and then in old times of conventional homeopathy, out of that C3 trituration, the remedy is made. Now, at a certain point, these young homeopaths experimenting in Germany thought, okay, and if we just keep going. What happened then? Yeah. So they were just playing around. Yeah. And say, okay, let's keep going after C3, even though Hahnemann did not say it. And they went to a C4. And all of a sudden there was something sacred coming in. And it was like a feeling like in church on a sacred place. Because in what happens in the fourth hour, then in what we call then C4, yeah, that we touch the sacred essence that in the core of everything that exists. And it's not that this comes with words, this comes really as a felt experience in our body. And you realize, wow, what we have been going through was actually a journey through a problem. We went through the physical, emotional, we went a little bit through the mental, the understanding, and now we're coming out on the other side, and it shows itself to be a gift. So it was really the problem was the wrapping of a gift. The gifts of life are very often not wrapped like Christmas in Christmas paper and with a silver bow, yeah, but they come often in very shitty disguise, yeah. And so we rather run away from, we rather avoid them. But when we go through, there's something coming out of it that's beautiful. I had a patient, for example, that's right now coming out of a long time of a deep depression, yeah. And the growth and the expansion is amazing. Like she really, for her, it was saying goodbye to her, the middle part of her life and an initiation into elderhood. She comes out with a whole different outlook on life. What an amazing, amazing growth. Yes, and then when we try to avoid that, we avoid the gain. We avoid the growth. This is not, and this is something where it comes together with what we've been talking before. You know, when somebody did this trituration, what I told you with touching the sacred, yeah, this is then what we call C4 trituration. And because nobody knew it, I called it here shamia, because for me, the main thing, the essence of this process is a transformation, which is an alchemical process. And the alchemy comes in the old alchemy in Europe, yeah, they turned lead into gold, yeah, or they worked on that. And but the knowledge of alchemy came through to Central Europe, through ancient Greece, where it was chemia, yeah. The ancient Greeks had it from the ancient Arabs, where it was shamia. And back then it was the transformation of low vibrating energy into high vibrating energy. And this is exactly what we do in preparing a homeopathic remedy. We take the low vibration of the physical substance, and in the process of reducing the substance more and more, we increase the energy, the vibration level more and more, and we open like the book of life more and more to allow its full unfolding. And this is what we take then as remedy. And when we take that as remedy, we can give it to a client that sits in the lower painful level of the journey, and say, hey, there's a path through it and leading above it. Wow. And that's worthwhile going. And everybody who did something like that, who did I call it then shamir, and added ceremonial aspects that are more based in my past with indigenous peoples here, with native people. But because for me it's a sacred process. It's something really sacred to say, okay, I embark on a journey where I know I will have a certain amount of problems, but I will go through it because I know in the end everything in nature is a direct creation of something sacred, of God or something divine, or however you want to call it. So I know when I stay with life, when I stay with the process, this is the only place I can end up, because this is in the very core of everything that exists.
Wow. That is so, so, so beautifully put. And I feel like you really helped me to deepen my level of understanding of what we're doing in homeopathy with patients. Like you said, you're taking them to the lower level of the physical, the pain or the emotional, and you're saying, hey, let's move through this and get to the higher level, the gift that was wrapped in shitty wrapping paper that expressed as depression or rheumatoid arthritis or whatever the expression is. And let's see what the gift is. Let's see how you're going to transform through this and really get all the gifts that are in this pain process. And so that brings me to another question. Is there a specific trituration process that you've been through with a substance that we typically, like we were saying in the beginning with opium, for example, deem as this bad substance, that where you saw the gift at the end, that you can kind of describe how that worked out in the trituration through the C1 to the C4?
Something that well, one thing, for example, there's, I did hundreds of these processes. So and everyone has its stories, more or less. Yeah. And so it's hard for me, but what just comes to mind, for example, lion. Lion was for me always super scary. I had nightmares of lions over and over again. I was chased by lions. I was running away from lions. I was hiding from lions. I tried to poison them, to kill them, to butcher them, whatever I could. I know this is something I really have a problem with. And it was so, even that people I had a problem, often they were Leo born from their zodiac sign. Yeah. And I have the feel, oh, if they come in the room, I just can leave, they take all the space. Yeah, they have this. And oh gosh. And I just knew there's something I'm really, really not in peace with. And lion represents power, it represents authority. Yeah. And I sure was not in peace with that. Yeah. Not with my own, and also not, but yeah, whatever. And so I knew, okay, at some point you got to deal with that. So I asked about whether I get something from a lion. Either, I don't care what it is, just something that holds the energy of a lion. And asked in Zeus, when you clean the cage, can you give me a few hair? Yeah. Or and no, we can't do that. And okay. And at one point there was a son of a patient of mine, and a beautiful elder that I had the privilege to be with, and to support her on towards the end of her life. And the family was very grateful for my support that helped just to make this journey as easy as possible. Yeah. And I knew he's living and working in Africa, and said, if you ever happen to get something from a lion, either a few hair or a bone somewhere in the desert, or just, I need it. I want to make a remedy out of it. Okay, one day there was a phone call, Roland, I'm visiting here, yeah, and I got something for you. And then I met with him, and he gave me a little plastic a bag with some hair from a lion's mane. And he said, I've been living in a Maasai village. And the last day, I asked a friend of mine who's Maasai. Yeah, I asked him, hey, I have a friend in Canada who's a healer, and he wants to make a medicine out of something of a lion. And can you give me something to have something? And he smiled, went into his dirt hut, came back with a ceremonial headdress of a lion that he as a young man had killed. Yeah, cut a few hair out of it and gave it to him. So it brought me that. 2 weeks later, my friend Sunil called me and said, Roland, I have something for you. Yeah, I had a client that is a warden in the last reserve in India, where there are still Asian lions, the last refuge for Asian lions, and they put them to sleep to mark them, and anyways, and he took a few hair of an Asian lion. Okay, so I had in a short time 2 lion samples, and I did the toleration separately, but I knew, okay, it's time, Roland. Yeah, okay. Then I was there with my wife, and we started, and she just was so happy in all her anger and aggression. Yeah, she's very good in that, and oh, the world is mine. Yeah, and she had just this power fantasies, and I got smaller and smaller and shrank more and more. Yeah, just angry and feeling like the victim. And I think, and then we were so lazy that we said, okay, let's just put the blanket in the garden and sleep in the sun. We were sleeping for just really just what you see from lions. Yeah. And in the end of the day, I know it was so painful for me. I said, I never should have touched that substance. I'm not ready to do it. I'm not ready. It just was terrible. Yeah. All my fears, all my anger, all my helplessness towards an overwhelming power towards was triggered. And I thought, oh, this is really not going anywhere. Next day, we went into C4 and higher, and it totally turned around. Yeah, it totally turned around. I could feel the C4 for me was, for example, the roar of a lion. The roar of the lion is the word of power. This is the word, the first word at creation, like the story in the Bible. Yeah, God created the world. Yeah, this is the word of authority, and we all have that. Yeah, and that with our word spoken with full coherence and integrity, and with the full authority of who we are, we create the world and we change the world. Yeah. So all of a sudden there was something totally different. Then in the next level there was about leadership. One aspect was about leadership, not a leadership that I'm bossy and I'm better than you. That was all in the lower levels, C1, 2, 3. There was bossiness and bullying and you name it, and aggression and bloodthirst and all of that. But later on, leadership is not about bullying and being bossy and telling others what to do. Leadership means I'm connected to a higher level of truth, and I can bring that onto my level and spread it. This is like when Martin Luther King did not come and said, you got to do this, this, this. He said, I had a dream. Yeah, and he was connected to a higher sacred potential and could channel that and brought it into at the right time into the people. Yeah, and this is why he was a great leader, not because he was super bossy but because he was connected to a higher level of potentiality, of higher level of potential truth, and he could see that. Yeah, and could bring that. So you see that what's in the raw material the lowest level was really about aggression and bullying and all of that. But the potential in it was about the highest level of leadership you can imagine. And so for me, when I then see there's a mom coming with her child, and she's 4-year-old, and she beats up the other kids in kindergarten, and she throws stones at them and hurts them, and look at her and talk with her, and then little girl comes with a plastic lion in her hand, puts it on my desk, and mom says, well, lion is the first word. It was not mom and dad was her first word. No, her first word that she learned to speak was lion. And how much easier can you have it as a homeopath? And you prescribe a remedy made of that holds the lion energy to tell her it's okay the way you are. I don't have to shut you down in your energy, but I show you a way through and to get over that. So I don't have to limit that little child, with her energy, but to say, no, it's good the way you are. Go through it, go higher. There's more to it. And this is the way we can go through it without needing to fight, to block it, or whatever, but to support it. And there's higher levels where she will has the potential of a great leader, and we need women in leader positions all over the world right now. So to support that, this is, for me, that is magic. And I could not have thought that from my dreams and my fears and from how angry I was at these bullies that take all the space, and all the authority, and I could not have made that up, that understanding. Mm-hmm. But in going through that, I could see, wow, there's something. Again, there's a problem, but if I don't fight the problem, but give myself to the problem and go through into the higher levels of the same energy, I reach a total different, it's a total different game. Yes, and this girl, this beating up others stopped, She could radiate her authority and others came flocking around her, but you did not have to beat them anymore.
Wow, that's beautiful. I love that so much. And I totally resonate with that. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Chiron in an astrology chart, but essentially Chiron is the wounded healer. And I have Chiron in Leo. As my wound in my astrology chart. So that's so funny. And so I'm curious if that's in your chart as well, but it's beautiful that child can now express that instead of suppress that energy, express it, because because that in astrology, that when you repress that Leo, or you have the wound in Leo, it's hard for the person to be creatively expressive. It's hard for them to be seen and to even be playful. They can be too serious. And so it comes the consequence of pressing that and to help her, guide her through that to the higher level. That's just so beautiful.
Exactly. I think we have a very sick connection. We think aggression is violence. And aggression in biology is just a normal thing. And aggredere in Latin means to approach something or somebody. That means I go towards something. There's no way to be creative without an integrated aggression. And we equate it with violence, but violence is when I can deal with aggression. Mm-hmm. So when I deny aggression, then I go in, and then I split the world in victims and in violence. Mm-hmm. But we gotta come back to the core energy, this passionate, fiery yes to life that is in the core of aggression. And that is the core of of creativity.
Yeah.
There's no creativity. I remember one of my first lectures in medical school, we had forensic medicine. Yeah, so the professor played a recording of a woman screaming and said, "What do you think that is?" And we all thought, well, that's a woman being raped, that's a woman being harassed or being beaten or whatever. Yeah. And he smiled and said, it's a woman giving birth. Now, when we look at that, if a woman giving birth does not have her anger and aggression and together, then it's going to be a difficult birth, probably. You have to be totally in with all your yes and no and whatever. I'm gonna go through it and it hurts fucking, but I'm gonna go through it and I get this baby out into the world. This is really a total yes to life, but with a lot of force. Yeah. And that's what it needs. There's no other moment in life that stands more for creativity than giving birth.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Well, Roland, I want to be respectful of your time. We're already over the hour. I so appreciate you coming on today. I really think that people get a lot out of what you shared today. So I thank you so much. I'd love to have you back on in the future to share more and just tell people where they can find you again. And if you have anything that you want to let them know about that you have coming up or anything like that.
Well, first thing, thank you. Thank you for this conversation. And I hope that my what I said is meaningful for somebody of our listeners. That would be great. I love my passion is talking about nature and how beautiful nature supports us. And I think the practice I do it is homeopathy. But this is what's behind it. And I think it's our relationship to improve our relationship with nature. We need that, and it's essential for our survival as a species on this planet right now. And this is where, for me, can we make peace in that basic relationship of us as humans, as the children of this earth, on this earth to this earth mother. So I really, thank you for talking a little bit about that. And you can find my website on www.vancouverislandhomeopathy.com. And I'm on Vancouver Island in a small town called Royston. And if you want my blog or my newsletters, that's really important. There I can get a little bit out a word of what's important and what's sacred for me. It's usually about the topics of nature, homeopathy, and spirituality. So in that way. So when you're interested in, have a look at that.
Great.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
you,
Kaylee.
Roland.
And all the best for you and your.
Thank you.
It's so beautiful that you do that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And to all the listeners who've made it to the end, thank you so much for your time and for listening. And I hope that you got something out of this. I'm sure that you did. And just thank you. And we will see you in the next episode. All right.